Welcome to the RMI, and this is our first fall event and our very first hybrid event. So hopefully we'll all enjoy the program, and at the end we'll want to see your feedback on how it went. So the mission of the RMI is to engage the public and other scholars in discussions about food, wine, sometimes beer, and to get your feedback on the presentations here. So as we always do at the end of the program today, we'll be looking for your questions. Now, since this is a hybrid event, it's going to be a little bit tricky. So for those of you who are here in the audience, you'll have to use the microphones. There will be people carrying this microphone and another one around. So you'll need to speak into the microphone to be heard. And then I will be dictating the questions from our online audience that's somewhere out there in the ether. So it'll be interesting to see how this works. All right. So tonight's lecture goes a little bit beyond our normal scope, which is to highlight food and wine scholarship here at UC Davis. We have an outside expert who will be speaking to us about wine business. Now, the Klenz Lecture Series, which this is part of, was established in 2005 through a pledge originally made by Beringer Blass Wine Estates in honor of its CEO, Walt Klenz. The endowment supports a lecture hosted by the RMI and sponsored currently by the Treasury Wine Estates. The series brings world-famous winemakers and wine industry professionals to UC Davis to speak to the student body and the community to share their perspectives, insights, and experiences in wine business. The goal is to help educate our budding winemakers and the public about the important issues that face the wine industry before and after wine is actually made. So our speaker will be introduced by Walt, who's here. Walt Klenz began his California wine industry career in 1973. In 1976, he was appointed the director of marketing at Beringer Vineyards. And over the years there, he worked his way up through a number of different appointments in management until 1990, he became president of Beringer. 10 years later, Beringer was sold to Foster's Group, which is an Australian wine company. And at that point, he then headed Foster's global wine business. Klenz served on the advisory board for ASC Fine Wines from 2008 till 2010, and currently serves on the board of directors of J. Lohr Winery and the Columbia Sportswear Company. He's past president of Napa Valley Vintners and the Wine Institute. Walt, please come up.
Thank you, Andy, very much for that nice introduction, and welcome everyone. It's fabulous. I want to start as I normally do by thanking the Robert Mondavi Institute and Andy and Babette and the whole staff here for putting together a great program that's now going into its 16th year, and through the COVID age and the virtual presentations, and it's so nice to see this room back with warm bodies, and also to have a nice audience that's still zooming in. So welcome to you here, and welcome to the folks who are out there in virtual land. I'm particularly happy to be able to introduce tonight's speaker, Jeff O'Neill. Jeff is currently CEO and founder of O'Neill Vintners and Distillers, but he has a long history in the wine business, going back to the 1980s, where he was a founder of Golden State Vintners. More recently, he was a founder of Ramsgate Winery in Carneros. For any of you who drive between the Bay Area and wine country, Carneros wine country, going up through Marin County and Golden Gate Bridge have probably passed that winery. It's a beautiful facility up on the hill, and I'll give you I urge you to go by, to stop by. I think you have to make an appointment though ahead of time, right? So, Jeff is also on the executive leadership board of the Department of Viticulture and Enology here at UC Davis. And most recently, just this year in 2022, he received the Wine Enthusiast Wine Star Award as Person of the Year. So I met Jeff back, we won't say how many years ago, when we were both fairly young fellow board members at Wine Institute, and have known him and ever since. He's been a long-time industry colleague of mine, and I can say a friend as well. Now, Jeff's going to speak tonight on a number of issues, but the title of his talk is going to be 40 Years Later, an Overnight Success. Jeff has proven to be a real innovator in the wine industry, starting back in the 80s in what we lovingly call the jug wine era. He was primarily focused in the San Joaquin Valley, as we all were in those days. But as the market has changed, he has evolved his business to more coastal, and he's developed a range of premium brands, primarily coastal based, that appeal to today's consumer. So, and very importantly, he's also committed his company to sustainability, both in the winery and with his vineyards and with his vineyard partners. Winery and vineyard sustainable practices, and he's become a leader in that important industry initiative. And we'll hear about that today, I think, a bit. So please join me in welcoming tonight's speaker, Jeff O'Neill.
Thank you, Walt. Great to be here. Welcome to those breathing our air here, and to the rest of you out in the ethosphere watching online. So I'm delighted. I'm honored. Thank you, Walt, for the gracious introduction. Andy, we have a long history of working together here at the university. So I'm grateful for the invitation, and I'm going to try not to put everybody to sleep here. But one of the questions that Andy gave me was, what are the things you've done that have been right? And actually, you phrased it a little differently. I think you said what's worked and what doesn't. I think about it, really as what have we done right and what have we done wrong. So I thought one of the interesting areas to go to was to look at my history in the business, because today's talk is really to bring a lot of you that are in the wine making arena and talk a little bit about, what are the business elements. And I thought, since I've pretty much made every mistake known to man along the way, that it would be fun to just kind of talk through, and then, we can cover a lot of, I think, what are interesting topics about fundraising and how do you do that, and private equity and IPOs, and then I want to end talking about sustainability, which kind of gets back to one of the fundamental points, which is really about how do you pivot, how does the industry change? And as Walt pointed out when he gave the brief introduction, 40 years ago, we were in the bulk wine business selling really jug wines, for, $5 a bottle. Today, we've all pivoted where that consumer has gone. And for us as a company, following the consumer is probably one of the most critical things. But I started back in the early 1980s, family business. I was going to come in, join it, and all was going to be well. So I joined the family business only to find out that the bank was about 1 inch from foreclosing on all the assets, which they did a year later. And I ended up working in the very early years, essentially for Wells Fargo Bank, because and a lot of you in this room, you're all quite a bit younger. You probably don't recall, because some of you probably weren't even born. The interest rates from 1975 to 1982, 83, they went from 5% to 18%. So the business that I was then involved with, had taken on all this short-term debt. So, I think, it's sort of like lesson number one, if you're going to take on debt, you better make sure you can repay it. So there was hundreds, well, thousands of companies that had taken on short-term debt, didn't even think about long-term debt, you know, or they were betting that it was going to go down. And our family business was one of them. So, you know, it didn't matter how hard you worked. There was no way you could work your way out of it. We were at 18% interest with the bank, plus probably a 4% penalty. So we were at 22%. There was just no way. So I would just get on my motorcycle and I would ride out to the coast. And because making wine didn't make any sense at that point. So ultimately, we did essentially salvage this business, because I went to the trustee and I just said, I got to get out of here. This is ridiculous. And I've got to go do something else. And he said, well, wait, just wait a second. Why don't we try to, I'll introduce you to some private equity guys. And you know, I think I was 27 years old. I wasn't exactly sure what private equity was, but I said, yeah, sure, I'll go meet these guys. So I ended up raising private equity money. We came in and we bought basically all the assets back, the family assets back from the bank. You know, the private equity group. I had no ownership at that point. And that's really how I started my career. So we were able to build the business with private equity, you know, in a very early stage. Then about a year later, I was looking around, you know, we had these assets, they were pretty rough. You know, we bought the assets back for 10 cents on the dollar, seemed like a good deal, but we were still gonna get killed in this business. We were gonna get run over. The deferred maintenance, we could not meet any of the quality specifications. The vineyards were in shambles. So I thought, well, what do you do now? You try to get bigger faster. So I actually found this property in the Central Valley. It was 12,000 acres. It was all of the Getty Oil Company assets at the time, and they had just built a relatively new winery, but all the oil companies were getting out of the business at that point. So I went to my new private equity guys and said, hey, you know, I think this is a great idea to try to buy this 12,000 acres of vineyards. And they said, yeah, that's a great idea. Let's go do it. So this really is a segue into a little bit about the banking industry and what happened and how it always seems to go through these crazy, crazy cycles. So back in 1986, you could go to a savings and loan and borrow money like it was venture capital. So I actually borrowed $43 million. We just bought the company for $1 million, right? And then a year later, we borrowed $43 million from a savings and loan in Texas to buy 12,000 acres of vineyards and this winery. So overnight, it was kind of shocking, that they would loan that money to a 29-year-old. But they did, and you know, I make it sound like it was kind of easy. Well, it really wasn't, because we were selling grapes to Gallo at $125 a ton, which, you know, today, you know, probably doesn't even pay for the spray rig on a per acre basis. But we were able to actually turn this company around, and you know, we created a unique operation in the Central Valley, which became the beginning of Golden State Vintners. Then, you know, fast forward, you know, it was time to give the private equity guys a break and let them move on. And so that was after 9 years. So we brought new private equity guys in, which is sort of, you know, point number 2 or 3 about when you're all out there and you're dealing, you know, you're going to have winemaking jobs, and you know, some of those jobs are going to cross over. You're going to be the general manager, the winemaker, et cetera. You're going to have this situation where you go raise money. So we actually replaced the old private equity guys. They got a very nice premium on their original investment, and I got the new guys. Well, the new guys weren't nearly as nice as the old guys. And Walt knows about stuff like that. And so ultimately, we had these new private equity guys, and they said, look, we're locking in with you 8 years, and I had this plan to continue growing the business. And lo and behold, 2 years in, they came to me, they said, we want to sell your company. And I said, but look, boys, you said we were going to hang in here for 8 years. And what that translates into, that means they have a bunch of other investments that are in the tank, and they have to actually show a return on one of them. So we became the operation that they own. So I said, look, I don't want to sell it, because I have this. When we had taken care of so many people, and so many people had grown up with our company, that I had this loyalty to our team. So I said, look, I'll take it public, but I won't sell it. So lo and behold, we took it public in 1998. And I'm going to tell this story because there's the right way to go public and the wrong way to go public, right? We did it the wrong way. So Walt did it the right way. So Walt, I'm going to make him blush here, but when they acquired Beringer Vineyards for, he'll correct me later, but it was approximately $320 million, and then ultimately took the company public with a valuation over $1 billion. I mean, that is a success, and then I think the sale to Foster's ultimately was $1.3 billion. So, you know, I'm not very good at math, but that math I can do. And then Golden State, we took that public. Goldman took us out. Mondavi had gone out earlier, but Goldman took us out. And we really thought we had something great here. And ultimately what we figured out was that a company that didn't have only brands, like Beringer was really focused. It was one lane. It was premium brands only. And we had a diverse portfolio, vineyards, distillery, bulk wine business. So the variability there made our earnings projections really, really difficult. We had talked ourselves into it that it was such a great idea to go public. But at the end of the day, it was a terrible idea because we were a company not built to be public. And the lesson there, and you're seeing it play out today in real life, you've got Vintage Wine Estates gone public. You know, that stock's off about 70%. You've got Duckhorn, which is a pure brand play, but you know, even in this market, that's a stock that's off 50%. So, you know, the markets can be tough, but they're really tough when you say you're going to, you know, you can tell everybody you're going to grow the business or earnings by 5%, and they will price you to that mark. But if you actually end up only growing at 3%, you know, they just, you know, it's Betty bar the door. They hit the sell button and goodbye. I mean, our markets are pretty darn efficient. So ultimately, we actually went to take the company private, and we tried to do that. And then in 2004, we ended up actually selling the business. So after we sold that business, I decided to start a NewCo, which was O'Neill Vintners and Distillers. We really wanted to be back in the business, but it was primarily a distillation business. Then we ultimately said we want to be in the wine business again. So we basically brought coastal winemaking techniques to the Central Valley. And we built a fairly large facility over the 10 years between, 12 years between 2008 and 2020. We added about 35 million gallons of cooperage and became one of the largest suppliers of premium bulk wine, which at this point we're buying grapes from basically 17 appellations around the U.S., around California. So, I mean, it's Paso, Monterey, Santa Barbara, Lake, pretty much everywhere. So once we started bringing all of these grapes together, we got the efficiencies to create a pretty good size business. And then I'll just give you kind of a very quick overrun of, again, mistakes that we have made. We thought we were really smart back in 2012. I bought 3 brands from Kendall Jackson because we thought we could turn them around. We should have known if Kendall Jackson was selling them, they probably weren't very good brands. So luckily, I did get their distribution footprint, so we had a national sales footprint. But those brands, they don't even exist today. Then we got a little luckier, a little further along with a brand called Line 39, which went on to become a fairly substantial brand. And then we have continued to just upgrade the portfolio. And again, this gets back to what's the nugget in this? The nugget in this is as a consumer has shifted, they have continued to pay more for products that are further upstream. So O'Neill's taken a pretty big shift in where we've been. And one of the most important things we've done is we've shifted from being really in the bulk wine business to being in the branded business. And the reason we did that was pretty simple. We saw a lot of our customers, a lot of our big customers, they weren't paying attention to their brands. They weren't taking care. They weren't investing back in marketing and sales. And we started to see that, and we said, wow, if this trend continues, we're just going to see those customers continue to move away from us. So that's when we pushed very hard into a national brand portfolio. And from an economics perspective, if we can take a gallon of wine that we typically sold in the bulk business and move that into a finished bottle of wine, we basically the revenue's 4x, and the EBIT, is about 2x. So that is a transition that we are going through, and I think it's an important one for our transition into the future. So one of the things that we have continued to focus on, one is following what the consumer wants. And I think our industry actually is at a bit of an inflection point right now, because I don't know that we know what the consumer wants, because we're losing market share. I would say the wine industry today is maybe down 1 or 2%. But we're getting our tail kicked by tequila, brown spirits, and seltzers. Beer has had a bigger problem than the wine has, but you have to ask yourselves, why is that? And I believe it's because we haven't figured out how to talk to that new consumer. I mean, right? You got me and Walt, you have baby boomers, right? They're still drinking a ton, but that party won't go on forever. And then you got Gen X, which is behind it, which is actually the exact same habits, but that group is much smaller than the baby boomers. And then you jump into millennials and Gen Z, and we haven't figured out how to talk to them. And they're not waiting for somebody to tell them why it got a 96, or I don't think they don't want to be told that Pinot Noir has to be consumed out of a Burgundy glass, or that Cabernet has to be in a Bordeaux glass, or it's wrong, or you have to spend more than $30 or else it's not good. So somehow we've got to figure out how to talk to those people. And there's a handful. I don't know if anybody was a 49er fan, but I don't know if anybody saw the Mayomi ad the other day. It was on the television, which basically said, this wine is delicious, and it didn't say anything else. It said, you're going to like this wine. And, here you have a Pinot Noir that doesn't taste like Pinot Noir, right? And this is an argument I have with all you winemakers out there. I have it with our winemakers all the time. This does not taste like Pinot Noir. I said, I don't care. I get it. It doesn't taste, but the consumer, this is the product they want. And they fell in love with that product, right? And it was a, dark, inky, you poured it, you looked like a real glass of wine, and, a little bit of residual sugar, and, plenty of Syrah or whatever the heck else goes in there, and oak chips, and I don't know what else. But it resonated with the consumer, and I mean, my God, they're selling the thing at $18 a bottle, and it's non-vintage, and it doesn't even taste like Pinot Noir. So it tells me we have no idea how to talk to that new consumer today. So I think that's going to be the big challenge for our industry. Now, for O'Neill, what we think the right way to talk to that consumer is through, in large part, through sustainability. We think that is going to be absolutely table stakes going forward. We were the first major winery. We crush about 180,000 tons a year. So that's, 2.5% or 3% of the vineyards in the state. And 6 years ago, we told every single grower, you have to be certified sustainable if you want to be a partner of O'Neill and sell your grapes to us. And of course, immediately I do these grower meetings out in various regions, and the hand goes up, we can't afford to do it. And I would say you can't afford not to do it. And now you fast forward, we're about 10 years into it, and I did one of these meetings just, a couple of months ago. And what we need to think about now is what is the next step after sustainable, right? So sustainable, basically allows you to use glyphosate, and a lot of other things. You're being pretty good stewards of the land, but we're probably not being the absolute best stewards of the land. So we have a number of regenerative farming experiments going on. I'm sure some of you are probably either working on them or have read about them, but it's really all about carbon sequestration. And then embedded in that is, how you treat farm workers and living wage and, all kinds of things. But we think ultimately that's going to resonate with that consumer. And, it's the younger consumer. They want transparency. We were the first one, this brand, it was on an earlier slide, called Harkin Chardonnay. And we make 140,000 cases of it, 100% barrel fermented. But I challenged our winemaking team. I said, that needs ingredient labeling on it. I want to see it, and I want to see how, can you take that product and what is the absolute maximum number of ingredients that you can get on that label? And we now bottle it. It just says grapes, sulfur, and tartaric acid. And those are the only 3 ingredients. And we're the first major company to actually, put our stake in the ground. And now my challenge is to our winemaking team, we make 20 million more gallons, right? So, how do we do that? And that is, I am highly confident that these sustainability initiatives will pay off, and I think that's going to be a great way to communicate with that consumer in the future. So, we're going to keep our foot on the gas, in a number of areas. Again, my marketing department created this slide: listen, learn, adapt. And I think at the end of the day, this is all about, you need to pivot. Where is this market? Where is it going? And we think that as we continue to talk to these younger consumers, that it's going to be really critical that they understand. They want transparency. They want to know, where's that wine come from? What's in it? And there's probably no good reason that we don't have ingredient labeling. And I think the wine industry is in a great place to do that. I think the spirits industry is in a terrible place to do that because of the types of products that are getting produced. And when that list has to go up on a Fireball, for example, I think people are going to be stunned as to what goes into that. And we got to get back to basics in terms of communicating with that consumer. So, we've done a lot. I've talked about it a bit. We were awarded the Green Medal Award by the Wine Institute, which is basically it's being at the leading edge of sustainability. How many people know what B Corp is? Oh, cool. B Corp is actually quite hard to accomplish. So it's on a scale of 1 to 200. Most companies, when they first apply, they get a score of about 50. And we scored 98, and we just got certified 4 or 5 months ago. But it's not that we just woke up one day and said, we're going to be B Corp certified. It's amazing what has to ladder up, and I cannot even begin to take credit for it. But the things that ladder up to it are fair wages, water management, waste management, zero waste, corporate governance, fairness. It is actually a pretty amazing, and those of you that aren't familiar with it, I highly recommend you go look at it. Some of the early adopters were Patagonia, Ben & Jerry's. There's a whole host of them. But my view is, if we're going to communicate, we have to do it transparently, and this is one of the ways to do it. So the future, we think, communicating with that next generation is going to be so important. I say it almost every time I give a talk, which is, one of these kids is going to grow up and realize that mango seltzer does not go with pasta. And I am confident that all of you young winemakers that are in the room that are going to help us, tell this great story and reclaim the table with the original natural beverage. I said not too long ago, we've been at this for 8,000 years, and I hope we have another few thousand to go. So thank you. Those are my comments. And I believe we are going to go to questions.
Right. So, more just microphones, or is the microphone there, microphone here? So who's got a question?
Come on, I think I have to call on people.
So taking the company public, you talked about it a little bit, but what kind of unlocked for you then in terms of doing that for the company? It sounds like infrastructure was a big piece of that, just building out more capacity, but I just would love to hear more about what did that help kind of enable you to do other than just avoid being sold?
It was a disaster. It didn't really let us do much. I mean, we had a pretty strong balance sheet, so, we went public. We were, I got to tell you, we hadn't really thought about it. But what happens when if you go public and then you don't meet your earnings, and then obviously the investing public loses confidence in that particular stock, and then the analysts lose confidence in it, and then they stop watching it, and then it basically just kind of dribbles away, and your stock kind of languishes. I mean, obviously earnings had a lot to do with that too, but it was pretty clear that we weren't set up if you're going to be public, you really need, and Walt can speak way better because he was way more successful at it than me, but you have to really be able to deliver consistent earnings. And if you say you're going to grow, grow. But when we had, for example, we had that 12,000 acres of vineyards. I mean, if we missed the estimate on the vineyard by 1 ton, we were 12,000 tons off. And so consequently, those earnings, in the really old days before we went public, you used to be able to like hide earnings, and you could like mush it around. So it, Jack Welch did it for years at GE. I mean, he figured out how to ditch. Eventually, the accounting, business caught up with, the shenanigans around hiding, and I don't know, maybe it was a good idea. I don't know, but anyway, that's being public really didn't help us like it helped Behringer. Oh, sorry.
Question on the B Corporation, and as you're talking sustainability and how that means to the wine industry, how does that translate to your customers? How do you say, well, Line 39 is a heck of a lot better than Charles Shaw, who is not a B Corporation in any sense? So how does that translate to the people that you're trying to attract, who want that transparency?
Yeah, thanks. Great question. So the way we think about it, I mean, unfortunately, today the B Corp doesn't mean a lot yet with the consumer. I think it will, and there's a few other organizations that are similar that I think will kind of bring it along. But where we see the benefit, well, first of all, there's a general benefit, right? It's a lot about just doing what's right for water and employees and wages and, you name it. But at the end of the day, how do we get that message across is a great question. And so when we look out for the next year or two, we think that message is going to get delivered by the big box retailers that we deal with. Every one of them has said, we're going to be, carbon neutral by 2050, or we're going to be, whatever by 2035. So we think that's going to be a big advantage for us when we go talk, and that's competing, let's say, with other wineries. But I also think it's going to be to our advantage when we start communicating with the consumer. And ultimately, but we don't have the scale, we don't have the kind of money to go talk directly to that consumer. So I think it's going to have to get, that message will get delivered largely by retailers embracing B Corp, or let's call it sustainable companies with good corporate governance. And I think that will help. Ultimately, the consumer, I think, is going to vote with their wallet.
Similar question. Have you seen a clear impact with consumers with this push to sustainability? Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, the question is, have we seen a response with the consumers with our push to sustainability? And I guess the short answer is no. But I think we're just, at that very beginning of telling that story. And I think our industry needs to keep telling that story. I mean, the industry's been amazing stewards of the land for 100 years. And you think about, all where our industry has come just in vineyard techniques. And, the next step, is truly getting a lot of things out of the vineyard that are still in there. But the industry's come a long way. But, at this point, we haven't really figured out how to talk to that consumer. online. You want to do a?
I've got a question for you. You talked about reaching the consumer or providing them with products they want. And what I see in the market is that there are also some consumers who are interested in, I would say, winemaker-driven wines, right? So that you have a winemaker with a story and a vision and they can articulate that, and that attracts customers. And it's sort of the opposite of what you were talking about. So I'm wondering if you could comment on, can your company do that as well as produce products that are, say, consumer tested?
Yeah, sure. So I guess could everybody hear that question? It was about, I guess the question sort of is how do we compete with a winemaker-driven wine? And the answer is, well, we happen to have 12 winemakers. I will guarantee you that every one of them is as passionate about our brands as anybody in the industry. For example, the Harkin Chardonnay. I mean, we have one winemaker dedicated. Now, just because we're big or bigger, I don't think should be a knock against a winemaker being devoted to that brand. So, Adam Popp, he has led this entire operation. And look, we are scale driven. We do need to produce quite a bit of inventory because that's the thing we built. And for example, I mean, sure, we could have a small tiny warehouse somewhere, and the guy could have 10 barrels or 20 barrels, and then okay, well, terrific. He's got a wine that costs that consumer $60. And we're taking, for example, Harkin, 100% barrel fermented, all hand stirred, and the consumer gets to buy it for $15. So, I think, look, pick your lane, right? And one of my, I actually forgot to say it earlier, as you all that are thinking about, you're coming into the wine business. Okay, which way are you going to go? You can either kind of go, you can go probably more volume at maybe a slightly lower price, or low volume and a really high price. So, obviously, you've got Napa sitting here, you've got Monterey sitting here, you've got Paso. So, there's all kinds of places. But at the end of the day, winemakers make, at least at our winery, they're not all just sitting at computers. So we're pretty proud of our winemakers, and we actually do a kind of a very, very fun event every year, which is called, we do a Shark Tank. And everybody in the winery gets to compete. And of course, I get to be the judge with a couple of my compatriots. But we have, we will launch a couple of products this coming year because our winemakers said, I think this is a product the consumer will love. So, so we're pretty engaged with our teams. There was a question. Sure.
I think you're onto a correct trajectory with this sustainability notion, but there are a lot of terms out there that characterize that particular strategy. Organic. I've been to a couple of wineries in Napa Valley that promote their biodynamics production system. Have you done any consumer analysis as to which of those concepts resonate with the consumer?
I think at this point, it's very hard, and it's a topic that I'm pretty passionate about because right now what we've got a handful. Well, first of all, look, I commend anybody that can do biodynamic today. That's damn impressive. I mean, Ed King at King Estate in Oregon does it, and Tablas Creek, and there's a bunch of them. You got to do it on a relatively small scale, or today it's on a small scale. Our goal is how we can scale. That's why we're doing a regenerative farming study, which it's basically biodynamic without the moon and the stars, right? So that's the goal. As how can we contain carbon and get glyphosate, get everything out of the bean. I mean, we fly mealy bug destroyers on with a drone to because we don't want to put a vehicle in the vineyard and compact it. So. Getting back to your question, so what we're seeing is this unbelievable proliferation of people making claims. you know, my wine doesn't have any sugar, my wine doesn't have any additives. Unfortunately, the definitions are pretty gray on a lot of stuff. The sustainability definition is pretty good, but I still don't think that goes far enough. And the consumers, you know, they're listening to celebrities, and, you know, there's one or two of them out there that they've invented this thing called clean wine. And it's total bullshit. You look at their website and they go, well, we defined what clean wine is, right? I mean, that is absurd. And you know, we've gotten the TTB to get after them, but you know, unfortunately, all that does is create more confusion. And my sincere belief, though, is that as an industry, we ought to be coming together to sell more wine, not talk about like my wine is clean and yours is not, right? I'm fine if she wants to say my wine is clean and by the way, that whiskey's not, or that tequila's not, or I'm fine with all of that. But to what I call the crab effect, to pull everybody down, I mean, it's such a mistake, such a mistake. So that's a great question and one that I get pretty worked up over.
This is more tailored toward economic sustainability. With the ongoing wildfires, I'm curious how that's impacted you. And there was an article in the New Yorker a couple months ago about the smoke taint in a lot of the harvest a couple years ago. And if you guys have done any research on shifting your production away toward grapes that hang longer throughout the season, and if you think that's gonna help.
Good question. You know, I don't know. You know, for example, for our company, out of the total tonnage we crushed over the past 4 years, less than 1% has had an issue with smoke taint. So, and you know, when you think about smoke taint, I mean, obviously Napa got, you know, hammered. Sonoma got hammered. Little pockets of Monterey got hammered. But if you really think about the entire state of California, I hate to say it's a non-event, but I think ultimately climate change and where we grow grapes and what they look like and what they taste like, I think that's probably going to be actually a bigger issue for our industry.
So you mentioned younger consumers. I'm kind of curious how you think about the life cycle of the customer and how you kind of maintain relationship, maybe trying to get younger consumers to stay with the brand over time. Kind of what's the approach you're taking?
Well, I think, you know, you've got to talk to them in a different language, right? You can, I mean, you know, I think a great example is Gallo ended up buying Clos du Bois from Constellation, and all of their ads are geared to, it looks to me like anyway, people my age, right? So Clos du Bois, you know, it's kind of it's an old brand. I mean, nobody's jumping up and down about it. But I think as you look at different generations, you know, the way you communicate is different. And we have a brand called, you know, Rabble, which is, you know, Mother Nature is in charge here. And, you know, and that 100% of that brand is really driven around consumers that are probably between 30 and 40. So we're trying to figure out how to, you know, tailor brands, because every brand has a life cycle, right? I mean, there are some great ones, right? I mean, some of the, obviously the super luxury ones, but let's set those aside for the moment. But when you look at the carnage, you know, if you go back today and you go to the shelf in CVS and, you know, some of the brands that used to be great, you know, they're at the bottom and they're $4.99. So I think, you know, there's two ways to look at it. One is to just kind of milk it for the cash, and the other is to continue to reinvest in it. And, you know, probably Behringer is a brand that has been reinvested. Treasury with Penfolds, you know, there are brands that you can reinvest in. I mean, Yellowtail, for example, is, you know, when it started, it was $12. It's a $6 brand now. So I think you have to take care of them, and then you have to pick your lane. I hope, did that answer your question? Yeah. Yeah. Sure, glad you guys started asking questions.
Hello. Everybody has concern for water. How are you dealing with the shrinking groundwater, and considering that Central Valley has dropped several feet?
Yeah, Ken, a good question. You know, I wish we didn't live in California, but it's hard to move grapes out of California. You know, starting with taxes and then going on to, all the other things that we have, wildfires and what have you. For us, what we have done is started just mapping. We have we have about 150 growers throughout the state. I mean, all the way from Lake County to Santa Barbara, and then all the way across to, Lodi, Clarksburg, and then around. And we're early stages, but we need to know the answer. And so what we've done is we have mapped every single vineyard down to where their well is, and then we're going to take the data, and then we're going to try to determine what does that look like over the next 3 to 5 years, or really probably 10 years. And there are places where I'm sure we're going to come to a conclusion that's going to be, we cannot continue to buy grapes in that region or from that individual grower. And I mean, unfortunately, the way water is in California, you can have a vineyard the size of this room, and then one, a quarter of a mile away, this one's got all the water it needs, and that one has none. So, part of it's going to be managing it, but no question, it's going to be a major, major issue.
Have you heard about the recharging the ground using what the Bangladesh people are using, because they are losing a lot of their land because of rising seawater, and they have to grow multiple crops in a year to sustain the population. So they have resorted to, they call the Bengal process of recharging.
That's recharging the groundwater? Yeah. I mean, yes. I mean, obviously, you've got to get the water somewhere to recharge the groundwater. But, the problem in California, and particularly in Southern California or the Southern Central Valley, is, they have pulled on that water so long that the subsidence has pushed it down. So the cavern that used to hold the water isn't there anymore, or it's 40% of the size that it was. So, I mean, I think I think the state will try. I mean, I think ultimately we're going to try everything. I wish I had a great water solution, but sorry. I don't have a smoke solution. I don't have a water solution. I think I'll go in the ball bearing business.
For the B Corps certification, I'm curious how much you had to peel things back in terms of the company. So with it kind of coming in as something relatively newer for you, how much has it changed things that you've gone down to the core and sort of reinvented what you've done there for some of that?
Yeah, no, great question. I love that question, and actually, I'm glad you asked it, because I actually, so this morning as I got up and I was looking at my emails, and somebody said, you got to come to this meeting. So this is a meeting that I don't know when I have to be there, but I have to be there at some point. B Corp update, blah, blah, blah. So that's, and then we talk about zero waste, sustainable accreditation for all of and everybody's got an assignment here, right? So everybody in our company is 100% in on taking care of this. And ISO 14011, regenerative viticulture update, transparency, product ingredient labeling, sustainability history, pesticide residue free, lightweight bottle discussion, research and development. I mean, our team they are on it. And you can't just wake up one morning and say, we're going to do this. So what's happened is originally we started with, solar, okay, right? Everybody's got a little bit of solar now, so congratulations, right? So where do you go from there? Then we got the largest worm farm in North America, which basically cleans 80 million gallons of wastewater a year for us. So now what comes out of that is 99% clean water that we grow alfalfa with, and then we sell the alfalfa. But all of this stuff, zero waste. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the lean initiatives, but it's basically everything in your winery has a place. So one of the best things that ever happened to us was coming in and telling everybody that we were going to implement lean. And I wish I could remember what it stood for, but it's basically, the employees, when you tell them you're going to do it, they think all you're doing is trying to get rid of jobs. What we're really trying to do is be more efficient so that we can be more competitive in the marketplace. But I would say there's nobody close to us that's our size. They're 5 years away from, I think, getting to where we are, because it's not just about spending money. It's it's got to be embedded in the culture, and it took off with us maybe call it 8 or 9 years ago, and we just keep leveraging it on top. And of course, I've got outside advisors. They say, how much does that cost you guys, right? And it's nominal. It's nominal what it costs us. I mean, there's a ton of paperwork, but it's so embedded in our organization now that it's made it quite easy to do. Oh, come on, Andy. You're not staying on your game.
Given the California challenges, have you considered sourcing grapes from Oregon or Washington?
Yes, 100%. Yeah, look, I mean, I think you'd have to be a fool not to go start looking around, but for different reasons, right? I mean, I think Oregon and Washington, they offer different things to the consumer. So to me, that question isn't more about, can we not grow grapes in California anymore? It's how does a company like ours satisfy the consumer? So, you go to Oregon, right? They make amazing Pinot Gris. There's wonderful Pinot Noirs. The valley's pretty small, and when it, to your smoke question, when it's smoky up there, it's pretty bad, and it's basically took out almost the entire crop three years ago. So and then a frost almost took out the entire crop this year. So the answer is we think both of those, Oregon and Washington, deliver a product the consumer's going to want. So that's yes. So yes, we've thought about it, but not because we want to get out of California. Anything else?
Going. Any more questions? Oh, we've got one down here.
Sylvia, uh-oh.
Is social media a factor in your sales and marketing?
Unfortunately, yes. But I will profess to not totally understand it, but people are surprised that I do have TikTok, I do have Instagram, I do have Twitter. So occasionally I look at it, but I think that the short answer for us is yes. It sort of depends on which brand and what demographic we are after. But social media, I mean, it's become a monster that I don't think anybody has figured it out yet. But I think we're all trying. Anything else? Yeah, go for it. I got nowhere to go. The rest of you probably want to leave, but I got nowhere to go.
Have you made any serious stylistic changes with the new consumers in mind, with new brands or existing brands?
Yeah, I mean, we're always looking at that. Yeah, I think the short answer is yes. I think the important thing for a company like us or any company, and all of you winemakers out here, is to making sure you make a product that consumer is going to love. And in our case, I mean, look, we're a supermarket-driven company. I mean, we're trying to make our wines sustainable, but really accessible. So we have to keep in mind that different demographics have different preferences. So, the short answer is yes, but that doesn't mean that I'm not battling with winemakers a lot about, what they think is right and what the consumer thinks is right. So I think the industry has a little bit of work to do around that. So I'm pretty vocal about it with our team. And the Mayomi example that I threw out. I mean, I think, look, there are times when you want to be absolutely correct, and then there's times when you want to please the consumer too. Okay, last call.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Okay, so I just want to mention a few things before we go. We have several upcoming events. One of them is Taste, which is just a week and a little bit more than a week out. It's our annual food, wine, beer tasting event. As usual, this event is super popular and is already sold out. If you have tickets, hope to see you there, and if not, I'm sorry. On November 1, we're going to have an in-person tasting here. We're going to be actually, it's sort of an experimental tasting. We're going to do a tasting sort of like winemakers do, where we're going to take a wine and we're going to add various components to it, like acid, sugar, alcohol, and so that you'll get a sense of when somebody says, oh, this wine has more acid in it, this is what happens, right? So we're going to actually have wines with adjusted levels of acid, sugar, and alcohol and some other things. And we'll see how that goes. So we're going to do that only in person. And then if that works, then we'll take it on the road. We also have a forum event coming up on November 10th. And we wanted to focus on the animal barns here at UC Davis. I don't know if you're familiar. Animal Science runs several large barns with horses, dairy cattle, and so on. And we're going to focus on the goat barn because, you know, those goats are so darn cute. But we'll have a presentation by the folks who run the goat barn, and you'll learn how students actually benefit from it. And we're working hard on some other events, which we'll be notifying you. So hopefully you're on our mailing list. You'll be the first to hear. And in closing, I want to thank our friends who support our events. Their gifts really help make a difference between an ordinary event and something truly special. And as I mentioned earlier, this is our first hybrid event, so I'd really appreciate getting feedback from you afterwards about how that part of it went, and what went well and maybe what didn't go so well. And again, thank you for attending. We'll be having a reception right afterwards outside in the lobby. And thank you for coming, and good night.